You're watching TelecomTV from ONS North America 2019. And joining me now is Prem Sankar Gopannan, who is Director of Engineering at Lumina Networks. Prem, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you.
We've been talking about the digital transformation of this industry for a number of years now.
Right.
Can you give us an overview of where the industry is heading and also how these shifts are calling for changes in how we manage infrastructure resources?
Absolutely. If you look at the digital transformation, right, it has been happening for quite some time now, right? The whole disruption of moving from PNF to VNF was the first stage, right? With VNF, you're able to scale irrespective of the boundary of the physical network function, right? But nevertheless, the problem was the whole VNF being a bit static. In fact, a lot of standards came around. HC defined the NFE stack, and the whole industry moved towards meeting those standards, right? But the question now is, with 5G around the corner, whether the whole VNF or the HC NFE would satisfy all the requirements for the workloads, new type of workloads that would come in, is the question, right? So that's where the digital transformation is going to be much more than just having to have your network functions meeting the requirements. It's going to be talking about the complete automation, including AI, ML, as well as a bit of predictive analytics coming in. Yep.
And is this what we mean by composable infrastructure?
Right. That's a great question, right? So I strongly believe that when we talk about the infrastructure, we are talking about cloud native. Okay. When we talk about cloud native, let's take an example, right? So let's assume that with 5G fully deployed, what type of users would come into the network, right? We are talking about new type of users, which is essentially massive IoT, connected cars. We are talking about AR, VR workloads, right? Which means the network has to be transforming itself in order to satisfy the needs, right? We are talking about the same network being composed depending upon what type of the end user requirement would be, right? Also, the interesting thing is the network slicing plays a very important role. What is meant by network slicing is you are basically composing the network based on what is the type of end user, right? Wherein, for example, when we talk about tactile internet, which is about URLLC, wherein URLLC stands for ultra reliable low latency, we are talking about millisecond delay, right? Can I realize or can I provide the same service with my existing network? What it means is you have all the network functions sitting on the core cloud, and then we are talking about the network trying to satisfy a URLLC use case, right? May not be possible, right? Because the lack or the time to TTYL between the user to that of the core cloud and then the breakout to the internet itself is going to be more than few milliseconds, if not sub-milliseconds, right? So what are we going to talk about? That is where the new architecture like edge that comes into picture, right? The edge is not really a static one, it's going to be dynamic. In that case, the edge, including the infrastructure, is going to be composed. The reason why I'm saying composed is because the network functions are not going to be pre-built. They're going to be built depending upon what the user wants or what the type of use case I'm hosting, right? So that is where what I do is I essentially look at what is the end user, the network looks at what is the end user needs are, and then it composes, and when it needs to scale, it would essentially need to further modify or change it depending upon the changing user needs, right? So this is where we talk about composable infrastructure, wherein we are also talking about not only just the software part, we are talking about the complete stack. When we say complete stack, of course, there are new hardware architecture that provides you. You also have network functions, the infrastructure, the Kubernetes, the cloud native, all of it together provides you the needed tools and sets to compose it.
Right, so what tools are required to compose infrastructure? And also, is this going to be another layer of investment for service providers?
Right. Well, from an investment per se, Lumina strongly believes that the service providers are in a better position if they are going to embrace the open source tools, right? The reason being, gone are the days wherein you have your requirement defined like few months back and your user comes probably after a few months back, or you deploy a service after a few years, right? Gone are the days. We are talking about real dynamic deployments and use case deployments, right? So that is where I think the service providers, they can leverage the open source. More so, the open source itself is getting a lot of these tools or ideas or patterns from the enterprise world, right? For example, the Netflix or the Googles of the world, they have already mastered the whole concept of cloud native as well as the composable infrastructure. It's going to be just the telcos or whoever is going to provide the service to adopt it or expect open source companies to build it for them. That's how it's going to be. So the investment would be there, but not to the level of the investment you would make in terms of a typical erstwhile infrastructure.
Now, Lumina Networks is the #1 deployed OpenDaylight provider. How does this all play with OpenDaylight's role in transforming networks?
Right. So that's a key question. OpenDaylight, as you know, has been deployed in some of the larger deployments. We are talking about OpenDaylight being deployed in live networks, right? Now, what we are trying to do is we are trying to see how our solutions can essentially bridge all the type of network functions. When I say bridge, we are talking about a brownfield deployment, which would be essentially made up of physical network function, virtual network function, cloud native network function, right? Again, what I want to say is everything has its own advantage and disadvantage. So I would foresee that in the years to come, it's going to be a hybrid environment, which means you need to have a solution that would cater to all of these three types of network functions. More so, all our solutions are built around catering to all three different types of network functions. The recent demo which you have seen yesterday in the Elephant booth, we are trying to integrate OpenDaylight with the network service mesh. And by that, what we are trying to do is we are trying to address the cloud native network function world. Also, I want to talk about one other product called Leap. Basically, it's a microservices based architecture. What we do is we basically add needed tools to that of OpenDaylight so that OpenDaylight can be used to manage any physical network function or any other app, and these apps need not be native to that of the OpenDaylight, right?
And can we go through some of the possible use cases that would be enabled by such a capability, and what's next for this technology and the role that the open source community can play?
Right. So particularly 5G. When we talk about 5G, network slicing is the building block of it, right? Already Lumina Networks had showed a joint demo at the Mobile World Congress with VMware, wherein we worked closely with VMware to build a solution, and we were leveraged, the Lumina SDN controller was leveraged in order to stitch the network part of it, which was about stitching the network using the physical network functions, right? So that's one use case which I can probably talk about, wherein using the network slicing, the demo was able to showcase how they can differentiate the network experience based on the use case.
And as you mentioned, this technology is evolving.
Right.
What's coming next, and what's the role of this open source community?
Right. So in fact, one other important part of the whole ecosystem is the definition of business requirements, right? In the network world, you would have heard of intent, right? Wherein what is meant by intent is essentially the users or the business applications can essentially mention what is the intent, and then automatically you have the network composed depending upon the intent. So I foresee that the future would essentially be more like an intent-based system. Number one, that is about how you deploy the network. Number two, it's going to be more about self-healing, self-learning. What is meant by that, with microservices coming into picture, there will be like thousands of microservices, and it would be humanly impossible for you to really go and debug where the issue would be. In that case, you need to have an AI ML system wherein it can essentially detect faults, or in fact, it can do a prediction of where the fault would occur depending upon the patterns, and then try to apply corrective action. So these are the two key things that would happen down the line, and both of it are pretty much key to that of the whole infrastructure that satisfies 5G or 6G. Yeah.
Prem, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.